Happy Friday. The Nightlight is on for Friday, January 12th. I'm Joshua Johnson. So much to talk about today, and not just the Iowa caucuses. We will have a preview of that, but there's another big election that you should know about on the other side of the planet in Taiwan, which could affect America's relationship with China. Also got a quick update out of the International Court of Justice regarding the charges of genocide against Israel. Israel made its case today. I'll bring you a little bit of that. Plus, have we canceled William Penn? One of our founding fathers was at the center of a culture war controversy. I'll tell you about it. And there's a new George Carlin comedy special out. Kind of. See what you think. Go to my Linktree site to follow me on YouTube, buy some merch, and put a few dollars in the tip jar. There's a lot to talk about today, and I'm glad to see you guys here today. It's been a bit of a wild day because, as you know, I like to focus on a few topics at a time, but there have been a lot of things going on. So let's dive right in. First of all, I wanted to let you know that there was an update out of the International Court of Justice regarding the accusations of genocide against Israel. We talked on this program yesterday about South Africa's case against Israel regarding the way that it's fighting the war in Gaza against Hamas. Now, if you missed yesterday's show, basically what happened is that South Africa filed a claim against Israel underneath the Genocide Convention to the International Court of Justice. That is the UN's court. It's one of the permanent major bodies, like the 5 or 6 agencies at the UN that are kind of the primary bodies of the UN. The only one that's not headquartered in New York. It's headquartered at the Netherlands. And yesterday, South African officials, including South Africa's ambassador to the United Nations, made their case to hold Israel accountable for what they allege is genocide in the way that Israel is fighting on the ground in Gaza. To be clear, South Africa is not saying that it supports Hamas outright, although there are some South African politicians who have. They've made no secret of the fact that they consider Israel's treatment of Palestinians a form of apartheid. And if there's one thing that South African politicians are going to be full-throated about, it's going to be something that they consider to be an apartheid state. This goes back generations, back to the days of Nelson Mandela, and to Israel's long-standing relationship with South Africa during apartheid. Israel used to sell weapons to the South African apartheid government years ago. So there's a whole lot of back and forth over this. Yesterday, we heard from Adila Hassim, who was an attorney from South Africa helping to make the case for South Africa. That was all yesterday. South Africa had the entire day to itself yesterday to make its case. This is not about whether or not Israel committed genocide. It's not a 2-day trial. This is kind of a preliminary step before more steps are taken. Today, Israel's team made its case pushing back against South Africa's charges. I want to play you a clip from one of the jurists who made Israel's case. His name is Malcolm Shaw. He is a British attorney, considered one of the world's foremost experts on the International Court of Justice. And he made part of Israel's case today. Here is some of what Malcolm Shaw said.
Israel has no intention of permanently occupying Gaza or displacing its civilian population. Israel is fighting Hamas terrorists, not the Palestinian population, and we are doing so in full compliance with international law. The IDF is doing its utmost to minimize civilian casualties, while Hamas is doing its utmost to maximize them by using Palestinian civilians as human shields. The IDF urges Palestinian civilians to leave war zones by disseminating leaflets, making phone calls, providing safe passage corridors, while Hamas prevents Palestinians from leaving at gunpoint and often with gunfire. Our goal is to rid Gaza of Hamas terrorists and free our hostages. Once this is achieved, Gaza can be demilitarized and de-radicalized, thereby creating a possibility for a better future for Israel and Palestinians alike. On 23rd of November, Prime Minister Netanyahu declared that any civilian death is a tragedy, anyone. And to avoid them, what you do is first you try and get the civilian out of harm's way. And that's exactly what we did. There are many more of the same. Any careful review of the official and binding policy decisions made by the relevant authorities in Israel since the outbreak of the war clearly evidence that such decisions lack any genocidal intent. The contrary is true. They are indicative of the consistent and relentless commitment of Israeli relevant authorities to mitigate civilian harm and alleviate civilian suffering in Gaza.
So that was Malcolm Shaw, who was one of the jurists making Israel's case to the International Court of Justice, defending against charges of genocide. A few of the other things that came out in the case today responded to both the way that this accusation was brought by South Africa and also the nature of some of the claims South Africa made regarding rhetoric against the Palestinian people. Malcolm Shaw, in his remarks, commented that those have to be taken in some context in terms of the remarks of people who had just been attacked by Hamas on October 7th. Some of the argument that South Africa made is that there were cultural and religious overtones in some of the remarks that were made in public that also got posted on social media that clearly tied back to ideological opposition to the Palestinian people on a deeper level than just war fighting. Malcolm Shaw, in his argument, pushed back against that. We'll see how the ICJ rules on that. The other piece that he brought up today, which is a bit of lawyering, I don't know if it'll be effective, but he's an expert in these matters, I guess, so we'll see, is that when, according to Mr. Shaw, when you make this kind of a case, you don't just start by filing it with the ICJ. You start by some kind of contact with the offending nation. And then when that bilateral process fails, then you go to the ICJ. He is basically arguing that South Africa skipped a step in trying to bring this case to the International Court of Justice, and that as a result, its filing on genocide charges is improper. It's out of order, basically, literally out of the order that it's supposed to be done in. I don't know whether or not that will fly. I presume that if Mr. Shaw is making this case, that there must be some potential for it to actually affect the outcome, but I don't know. We'll see how that goes. From here, you have the judge at the International Court of Justice who will rule on this, but, and I'm just looking at an NPR write-up of this that was actually super helpful for kind of explaining what's going on there. A ruling may not come for a very long time. It may not come for years. That's why South Africa, when it testified yesterday, asked the court to issue what's called a provisional ruling, basically an injunction. And that would direct Israel to stop its military campaign in Gaza and to increase humanitarian aid. That could come much faster. Then the question becomes, what will Israel do? Israel could just say, yeah, it's really cute that you think that way. We're going to go back and keep killing Hamas. That's entirely possible. Israel has pushed back against a number of processes at the UN over the years because Israel has argued that it's not been always treated fairly by the international community as it fights to kind of protect itself over the years, or has fought to protect itself since 1948. So whether or not Israel would even pay attention to a provisional ruling from the ICJ remains to be seen. We also talked yesterday about the impact of finding someone or a nation or an actor, a non-state actor, but particularly people who are acting on behalf of a national government, finding them guilty of genocide, that can dog them literally for the rest of their lives. Slobodan Milosevic, who, known as the Butcher of Bosnia by some, head of Serbia, who went after Bosnian Muslims in the 90s, was behind the massacres in Sarajevo and Srebrenica, eventually ended up behind bars, died behind bars before he could be fully prosecuted and brought to trial. The Rwandan genocide, a large number of people, dozens and dozens of people involved in the Rwandan genocide also were brought to justice, faced charges, and many were convicted and sentenced as a result. And those were horrific genocides. In Rwanda's case, as many as 800,000 to 1 million people were slaughtered, and as many as 250,000 women and children were raped as a part of the Rwandan genocide. So this can have really deep implications. However, do we really think that someone's going to try to drag Benjamin Netanyahu out of Israel and bring him before charges? That seems hard to believe. I guess it's possible. Whether or not it's probable, whether or not anyone in Israel will extradite him remains to be seen. But who knows? I guess theoretically it's possible, but I don't know. It seems far-fetched to me. But we shall see where that goes. So that's the update from the International Court of Justice. That happened today. We'll keep an eye on that. But again, nothing's going to move on this after today for probably the next few weeks. In NPR's write-up of this, though, it's worth noting from one legal scholar, Matteo Alexianu, they say that states comply with rulings from the International Court of Justice, these provisional rulings, these kind of injunction-like rulings. States comply with them in just half of all provisional rulings, but there can be indirect effects in terms of the message that it sends to the world's community, and that not complying can send a message to the rest of the world in terms of whether or not a nation is actually part of the international order of things, whether they can be trusted to be part of these UN processes that move slowly but are better than more direct hostilities. For all of the complaining people have about the UN and the complaints they levy against the UN, many of which are quite justified, the point of the United Nations was never to kind of abrogate the need for other means of solving problems. The UN is a way of preventing war, but it doesn't eliminate war. Would that it could, right? But at least it gives another set of options. And if South Africa and Israel are engaging in this way, in the view of the world community, at least making their case to the rest of the world, then we at least get to hear what they have to say. That has a value. Is it enough? Probably not. Will it save lives in Gaza? Who knows? We'll see. But that is the latest with the Israel genocide case. That ended today. We will see where that goes from here. I'll keep you posted. And as always, if you have questions or thoughts about this, or you just want to talk about this further, if you think there's an aspect of this that I should go into that needs more exploration or explication or illumination, just let me know. And I would love to continue the conversation. That is one of the many things I wanted to talk about today, because today seems like it's just filled chock full of stuff. It's stuff a go-go today. Glad to have you with me on the chat today. Joseph, happy Friday. Hello. Good to see you there. Sarah, I'm sorry you're not feeling so well. Sarah says you're at home using a nebulizer today. Hope you're feeling okay. Holly joked about an albuterol hookah. Could you imagine? I actually could. I would probably be so awake and alert I could see through time. Nora, hello. Good to see you there, Nora. Glad to have you today. Oh, hey, Mom. How's it going? Thank you. I'm glad that you like my journalism. I very much appreciate that. Good to see you, too. Good to see all of you who are watching on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. If you are watching on the site formerly known as Twitter, now known as X, please know that I cannot see your comments in the chat in the software that I use to stream, and I also don't really communicate much on X anymore, although I need to talk to y'all about that at some point later, probably next week. But if you're watching on X, please know that your comments in the chat will not reach me here in studio. So you can move over to YouTube and take part there and be part of our wonderful online YouTube community. All the links are at my Linktree site, linktree.com/nightlightjoshua. You'll also find the links to follow the podcast and to buy Nightlight merch and to put a few dollars in the online tip jar. But X is not your best bet to stay in touch with me. You should move over to YouTube, Facebook, or Twitch, and we can stay in touch there. Let's dive in with the big thing that I think everyone here is thinking about, and that is the Iowa caucuses. They are on Monday. It has been a long road to the Iowa caucuses. There's been some attrition this week. You may know that former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie dropped out of the race this week before the Iowa caucuses. Indeed, he dropped out of the race before a debate between Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida and former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley. They debated on Wednesday. Vivek Ramaswamy remains in the race, although he is polling very low. Donald Trump remains the presumptive frontrunner, at least in the polls. He has been going to Iowa in the last few days. He was there for a town hall with Fox News on Wednesday night, counter-programmed against CNN's debate. Yesterday, he was in court in New York with the civil fraud trial in Manhattan to determine the punishments against the Trump organization. That also became a very political appearance for him as well. He's been getting a lot of political mileage out of this. And it remains to be seen what Iowans are going to do. There are a number of good, smart write-ups about what to watch out for on Iowa caucus night. I'll walk you through some of them. I don't have any predictions for the Iowa caucus. I don't know if you do. Feel free to put your thoughts in the chat about the Iowa caucuses, by the way. Questions, comments, thoughts. If you've ever voted in the Iowa caucus, I would love to know what you thought. Although this year it's structured a little bit differently. It's not the same as it has been in the past. And I will tell you more about that in just a minute. Let me begin with this from one of the stations in Iowa, which is KCCI. They are one of the local affiliate stations in Iowa. Just explaining what this is. First of all, before I get to any of that stuff, I don't want anyone who is listening to me right now to put too much attention on the Iowa caucuses. They're one vote, and they are very different from the rest of the country. The Iowa caucuses do matter. I wouldn't say that they don't. They absolutely do. But please don't get too connected to the Iowa caucuses for an array of reasons. One of which being that the Iowa caucuses don't often predict who is going to be the nominee. The people who count themselves as Republicans in Iowa are not quite the same as the people who count themselves as Republicans in New Hampshire, or the people who count themselves as Republicans in Nevada or Florida or South Carolina. They have some significant differences. And I know that we in the press love to talk about like these big turning point moments, the Iowa caucuses. Don't get it twisted. The Iowa caucuses are important, but they're not necessarily predictive. In fact, they are usually not predictive. Larry Sabato from the University of Virginia runs their Center for Politics. He is one of the smartest nonpartisan voices on politics that I look to. And he put out a guide ahead of the Iowa caucuses on their site in which he kind of breaks this down a little bit further. Here's how Larry Sabato puts it, quote, "Historically, winning Iowa has neither been necessary nor sufficient for winning either party's presidential nomination. Many caucus winners have failed to win the nomination, and many nomination winners have failed to win Iowa," unquote. And then he works his way down. Back in 1972, Democrats, the number one finisher in the Iowa caucuses was uncommitted. That's kind of like saying none of the above. That's kind of a remarkable outcome. But Ed Muskie was technically the front runner. George McGovern finished second, but he ultimately got the nomination. 1976, uncommitted, finished first among the Democrats, but Jimmy Carter got the most support, which helped him get the nomination. Gerald Ford narrowly held off Ronald Reagan in the Iowa caucuses. David Yepsen called it a straw poll in sample precincts that was taken as an early sign of Ford's weakness as a candidate. But he still got the nomination that year. 1980, Jimmy Carter easily beat Ted Kennedy, won the nomination, didn't win the presidency. Kennedy's challenge helped expose Carter's weaknesses. George H.W. Bush upset Reagan, who'd win the nomination, and then picked Bush as his running mate. So Bush beat Reagan in the Iowa caucuses in 1980, but Reagan beat Bush for the nomination and then made Bush his VP. 84, Walter Mondale wins handily in the Democratic Iowa caucuses. Gary Hart finished second, but he ended up pushing Mondale for the nomination before losing to the former VP. 88, Michael Dukakis finished third. Bob Dole got nearly double the support of Bush, but Bush won the nomination. So you get the point. I won't go through every single one of these. You get the point. The Iowa caucuses are worth watching because it begins the season. It begins the political kind of race to the finish line, which is not going to feel like a race. I think it's going to feel like a decathlon at best. But it's worth watching just to know kind of we're off to the races, we're off and running. Wouldn't ignore it, but I wouldn't plan your night around it. Unless you're that person. Unless you're that person, and then I'm not gonna hold it against you. One of the people who is that person who would plan their night around it is Amy Walter of the Cook Political Report. She is also fabulous. Cook Political Report is a paid service. It's behind a paywall, but they do amazing journalism, nonpartisan journalism. They're the ones that I told you that follow every single district in Congress in terms of who's up and who's down, all of the governor's races, all of the Senate races very granularly. So they're the ones who kind of like do the deep, independent, nonpartisan political analysis of elections and campaigns, specifically the horse race, rather than kind of day-to-day politics. Amy Walter, who is the head of the Cook Political Report, dropped a piece about Iowa caucuses today. And it begins, I thought, in a very interesting way. Here's the way that Amy Walter puts it in Cook Political. Quote, "For the first time since I've been covering politics, the Iowa caucuses are a snoozer. It's hard to get excited about a contest where the frontrunner is leading by more than 30 points. No one I've spoken with who is involved at any level with the Republican presidential contest thinks former President Donald Trump will lose. The only mildly interesting speculation involves the size of Trump's win and whether Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who has staked the fate of his campaign on the state, will come in second or third place behind former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley," unquote. So Amy's one of the sharpest people I know talking about electoral campaign politics. If the good money is that former President Trump is going to take it, then okay, perhaps the Iowa caucus is useful in a couple of other ways. Iowa tends to have a very large evangelical population. A lot of the reporting leading up to the Iowa caucuses has been about people who apparently consider Donald Trump to be a godly man or a man of God, one of the two. That might be part of the indication of how his cultural base looks, rather than whether or not he looks politically viable or whether he'll win the nomination, but some of the cultural connection. Evangelical Christians, people who call themselves evangelical Christians, practice evangelical Christianity, profess a personal relationship with God through Jesus Christ, were among the most important bases of support. I think you cannot whip up that kind of messianic zeal for a candidate who has been so irreligious through his life, unless you are able to appeal to that base. That's why he has such a strong hold on the Republican Party. If anyone ever looks at the party and goes, why is Donald Trump so popular in the party? It's because people believe that God is on his side. I mean, when you boil it right down, a lot of his political support comes very squarely from people of faith. Personally, I prefer Abraham Lincoln's approach. Abraham Lincoln once said, "Let us pray not that God is on our side, but that we are on God's side." That's what I'd prefer. But that's just me. So I think the Iowa caucuses could be useful in terms of looking at what a very core, solidly conservative, red state Republican evangelical voter thinks of the candidates that are out there. None of the candidates, I think, has actually stepped on their own feet when it comes to dealing with evangelical Christians. But Iowa is much more reflective of that evangelical base than a lot of other places. Some of the other things that Amy notes, Amy Walter is going to watch whether or not Donald Trump gets to 50%, not just the margin of victory, but whether or not he really has command of majorities there. It looks like, at least to Amy, that it looks more like 35, 45% than 45 or above. And it's possible, and Amy is kind of pointing to this, well, I'll just read it to you from her piece. Quote, "The candidate capable of putting together a coalition of never-Trump Republicans who make up anywhere from 15 to 20% of the electorate, and sometimes Trump Republicans who are about 35 to 50% of the electorate, can beat the former president in a one-on-one contest. That theory, however, goes out the window if he rolls up a majority of the vote," unquote. So you had Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley and Chris Christie trying to appeal to those never Trump, sometimes Trump Republicans, particularly DeSantis and Haley had been talking about that a lot in their more recent debates and town halls, trying not to kind of punch back at Donald Trump, but saying there's a better way to accomplish the same things, right? And so that's part of what Iowa might reveal. Have they been able to build some coalitions outside of the core Trump base? Have they been able to pull a few people away who were kind of on that edge, who really would like someone who's not quite so, as Nikki Haley put it, chaotic, or what's the other phrase she used? Oh, in his feelings. Never heard that on the campaign trail, but okay, do you, boo. Man, can they pull those people away and build a strong enough coalition? I don't know that they can or have, but we'll see. Maybe. Other things Amy says she's looking for, whether or not Nikki Haley is able to make inroads with voters outside her natural base. South Carolina, presumably, she's going to be great. New Hampshire, she's been endorsed. The next state, New Hampshire, she's been endorsed by its governor, Chris Sununu. So can she get some momentum among the rest of the voters that she needs early on? Evangelical, conservative, Republican, non-college educated voters. Can she do that? Why? Amy Walter makes it clear. The South Carolina electorate looks much more like Iowa than New Hampshire. For example, 2016 exit polls, a quarter of New Hampshire voters identified as evangelical and 42% as independent. In Iowa, South Carolina, 2/3 evangelical, 20 to 22% independent. So you have basically Iowa, New Hampshire, and then Iowa again. That's the way that that's the cadence for these different elections. That's why they're worth watching. And I would look at Iowa, not so much just because of Iowa, but because of South Carolina. That really is more the point. Also, the other piece of it, and I'm just going to look this up very quickly, but I think we already know, the weather in Iowa looks miserable. The National Weather Service out of Des Moines, just pulling up their latest forecast. Oh, geez. Latest snowfall totals through today. 6 inches of snow at Des Moines Airport. National Weather Service weather station in Des Moines, 7 inches of snow through noon today. So the weather is going to be a huge factor. At a number of the airports around town, zero visibility. Zero. So it's going to be, I mean, it's a half-mile visibility at Des Moines International right now. So it's going to be a little bit wild, kind of looking outside. Here's an image of Interstate 80 near Victor. I-80 runs from coast to coast, more or less, almost coast to coast anyway. This is I-80, runs from Oakland to New Jersey, I believe. Just whiteout conditions, total whiteout. So how are people going to get there to vote? Are people going to get there to vote, or will this make it significantly harder for people to be able to vote in the Iowa caucuses? You look at some of the wind chill forecasts for next week. According to the National Weather Service, Monday wind chills, Monday evening for when the Iowa caucuses happen. Lord Jesus. Oh my God. I can't. Wind chill forecast. Des Moines as low as the 30s. -31, wind chill. Waterloo, Iowa, -31. Ames, Iowa, -32. Carroll, Iowa, -35. Life-threatening cold. So not only do we want to know how people are going to vote, we want to know if people are going to vote, if they're even going to show up to these caucuses. And a caucus is not just for voting for the president. You're also voting for delegates who are going to continue the process of saying, the great state of Iowa and Des Moines nominate so-and-so for president. Like, that's also happening. It's a party business meeting. That's why it's different from a primary where you go in, you vote, you leave. A caucus is literally a gathering. And that gathering may not be so well gathered if people are facing life-threatening cold. Lord Jesus. I'm glad I vote in Nevada. Yeah. But we'll see. We will see how that goes. We'll see how that turns out. But again, I would not look too much at Iowa for its own sake. I would look past Iowa to South Carolina because I think that's really where there is some value in there. The other thing to note, by the way, in terms of who we are as voters, I will be harping on this. I just want you to know that this is going to be my axe to grind for a very, very long time. So if you don't like this, you need to just turn the show off because you're going to hear this over and over. One of the things I need you to remember, this is me banging my drink on the table so that you look up. One of the things that I need you to remember when we look at the divide in this country, There is a huge piece of this divide that my former colleagues in the mainstream press do not talk about. And they should. My partner always criticizes me, like, don't clap your syllables. People don't like that. To hell with that. Pay attention. Mainstream media. And you pay attention too. The largest portion of voters in this country is not reflected by the race we're covering. The largest portion of American voters are not Democrats, and they're not Republicans. Look at the latest Gallup poll. The largest portion of voters in this country are independents. We are not a red-blue divided country. We are red-blue blank. Let me say that again for the people in the back. America is not a nation of red versus blue. We are a nation of red, blue, blank. People who want to be firmly on one side or the other, and people who want nothing to do with any of it. The more we look at ourselves as two opposing sides, the farther we get from bridging our partisan divide. Why? Because most of us, the largest portion of us, don't even live in that damn divide. We want nothing to do with it. And unless we can have a conversation about politics that actually includes everyone, including the people who are like, New Dealer, I'm out, we're never going to make progress. Please do not believe these people who tell you that we are a world of left versus right. There's also the center and there's the outside. And the largest portion of Americans, poll after poll shows this, describe themselves as not being on the left or the right, as not being a D or an R. They don't want either of it. That's why the primary process has to be watched very differently, because you're looking at a minority within a minority of the American electorate. They do not speak for most Americans. They have every right to pick their own candidate, but by definition, they don't speak for most of the country. So why are we paying it so much damn attention? It's interesting. And it's easier to talk about than the complexity of the American people as we really are. It's hard to complexify the country for itself. It's way easier to just Jets Sharks the whole thing and call it good. It's not good enough. It never was. Take a look at what Gallup found. Independent party identification tied for a high. Democratic Party identification at a new low. According to Gallup, according to Gallup, political independents continue to constitute the largest political bloc in the U.S., with an average of 43% of U.S. adults identifying this way in 2023, tying a record high from 2014. Independent identification has been 40% or higher every year since 2011, except for the 2016 and 2020 presidential election years. I think that's understandable. A number of independent voters will pick one party just to be part of the primaries and then return back to their independent affiliation. But take a look at this chart. Hold on just one second. Let me pull this up so you can see the scope of how this has moved over time. Here it is. U.S. political ideology identification. From 1992 to 2023, Gallup has asked the same question. How would you describe your political views? Very conservative, conservative, moderate, liberal, or very liberal? They also asked, how do you consider yourself a Republican, Democrat, Independent? Which one do you lean more towards? This flip-flops back and forth in terms of what people lean toward. There was a cross in the 90s where Republican dropped. They were basically tied in the years after 9/11, 2022, 2023, and fewer Americans identify as Republican than Democrat for a long time, but that just flipped in 2023, and not by much. It had been pretty much tied in 2022, barely flipped in 2023. But if you ask, do you consider yourself a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent? 43% independent. 27% both Democratic and Republican. They had been tied again last year, but decreasing. And if you look since like the 2000s, overall, the percentage of people who call themselves partisans at all is decreasing. Now, some of these might be libertarians or Green Party candidates or socialist candidates. I don't know. Gallup doesn't ask. But I think it's important for us to be very mindful that over time, particularly since the 2000s began, the American people have been moving away from partisan politics. So what happens to all of these homeless voters? Where do they go? What do they do? I find it kind of fascinating, but that's just me. That's just me. Anyway, let's pause for just a minute. I want to continue talking about this in just a minute. I see you've posted a lot of different comments in the chat. I'll go through those in just a second. Also, want to take a look very briefly at an election that's happening tomorrow in Taiwan. We talked earlier about the fact that half the world's population is going to the polls this year in countries around the world. More than 4 billion people will be voting in democracies around the world. Taiwan votes tomorrow for a new president. That has a lot to do with the U.S. because our relationship with Taiwan is directly tied into our relationship with China. And China's been talking big smack about Taiwan and what it would mean depending on who wins that race. I'll get into that. Also, I want you to see part of this AI comedy special where an AI bot is impersonating George Carlin. The impersonation is actually kind of good, but is it good enough? You decide. I'll show you next. This is The Nightlight. I'm Joshua Johnson. Good to have you with me today. Remember, you can go to my Linktree site, linktree.com/nightlightjoshua, to find all the links to follow me on social media. There's a contact now form where you can send me your questions and thoughts at any time, an online tip jar if you enjoy the program, Nightlight merch, which is finally dropped, including our Gullible Ain't Sexy t-shirt, and information on how you can follow the podcast of this show. Also, if you cannot listen live, you can become a premium subscriber, listen anytime. Also take part in the monthly Ask Me Anything live stream, which should be coming up very soon, and get some discounts on Nightlight merch in the online store. Before I move on, let me get to some of your comments. Let's see. Holly writes, my state has a presidential preference election and I can't vote in it because I have no party. Sarah writes that I've always refused to choose a party. Nora writes, it's easier to affect the development of politicians into viable candidates if you start at the party level working on dog catcher races. You know what, Nora? A lot of people ignore those smaller races down ballot. They matter. They absolutely, positively matter. Sarah, you asked a question in the chat. I tried to find the answer and I don't have it. Gallup, I'm sure, has the data. I just can't grab it because I'm not a subscriber to Gallup. Sarah asked, is there any data on the age of these quote unquote independents? That is a good question. I don't have the crosstabs on this. I'm sure I could pay for them, but I just don't have the crosstabs, unfortunately. I would like to. But I did find a little bit more information before I show you that. Hello to Jerome in the chat, who says he's in Michigan with a little snow, 10 to 14 inches. Ooh, Jesus, that's a little too much snow, I think. When there's enough snow that you can't see your foot, stop walking. I think that's Jesus. That God is trying to tell you something. Please stay safe in all of that snow. I will not. I refuse. I quit. I resign. I fire myself. No. Although I don't hate Michigan. I think Michigan's got a lot to love, but the snow is not one of those things. Let me show you one thing, Sarah. I could not find the age data. I'm sure it's in Gallup's records. I would have to pay for it. And maybe I should. I don't know. Maybe I should look into that and see if I can pay to get access to that. But two more things I did want to show you that are germane to this. From October, Gallup found that support for a third U.S. political party is up to 63% overall. 63% of U.S. adults overall currently agree with the statement that the Republican and Democratic parties, quote, do such a poor job of representing the American people that, quote, a third major party is needed. 2/3 of U.S. adults say so, that we need a third party. That has flipped over the years. Now it is very strong support for a third party. Support for a third party is strongest among independents, second strongest among Republicans. 58% of Republicans say they agree that a third party is needed. 46% of Democrats say that they agree that a third party is needed. Also, last week, Gallup put out a poll showing a record low in satisfaction with the way that democracy is working. When they just asked people, are you satisfied or dissatisfied with the way democracy is working in this country? Back in the 80s, it was like 61%, dipped strongly during the Iraq War, came back up. Now it's 28%. Since Gallup has been asking this question in 1984. Now, it hasn't asked every single year. It's asked periodically. But since it asked, it's dropped from 61% to 28% in Gallup's poll. So, another set of data worth considering there. Let me talk to you a bit briefly about the election in Taiwan. We talked a little bit about that before. I won't weigh you down with this too much, but I did want to get to this a little bit. I will mention, by the way, two stories internationally that we need to keep an eye out for. One is the election in Taiwan, and we'll get to that in just one second. The other is the attacks by the U.S. and the U.K. on Houthi rebels off the coast of Yemen. If you've not been following this story, Yemen has been in the throes of a very intense civil war for a long time. There's been a lot of civil unrest in Yemen. It is basically a failed state. Houthi rebels, who are one of the ethnic groups in Yemen, a very small ethnic group that overran the government and kind of ran them out of the capital, have been in control. The Yemeni government kind of decamped to another city. But a lot of the world's international trade flows around that area, up and around the Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea. A significant portion of the world's trade, not as much of America's trade. One of America's top economic analysts, or advisors rather, was asked about this yesterday during a press briefing and said so far it hasn't really affected the U.S. economy, but they're keeping an eye on it. It's gotten so serious that instead of sailing around this area that's kind of parallel with, say, Egypt in northern Africa, they have to go all the way around the bottom of Africa and then keep going. That's how bad it's gotten. The Houthi rebels claim that they are attacking ships that are connected to Israel out of support for the Palestinian people. And by extension, I think for Hamas, because the Houthi rebels also have ties to Iran. So the US and the UK and a number of other nations had sent some additional military assets to the area and said, you need to stop doing this. They didn't stop. And so in the last 24 hours, the US and the UK have exacted a number of airstrikes on the Houthi rebels. The Houthi rebels say that this is going to be an escalation. They will not relent. They won't quit. But this is an escalation of this campaign as it is. Whether or not this will be good for the war in Israel, I doubt, but I don't know that it will have that big of an impact compared to some of the other factors that will bear on the war in Israel. It's certainly an escalation. Some of the Middle East partners of the U.S. and the U.K. are not happy about it because they like to have peace and quiet in the neighborhood. That is not quiet or peaceful as it is right now. Beyond that, we might start seeing some price increases. There were already some supply chain upsets. IKEA had to move some of its material around to just get furniture to its stores in some parts of the world. We'll see if this affects gas prices. That's one of the concerns. But again, gas prices are affected by lots of factors, not just the actual transit of oil in shipping channels around the world. That's one piece of it. It's not the only piece. Much more for Europe than for the U.S. Much more for Europe than for the U.S. So that is something to keep an eye on, whether those strikes will continue, whether they will ease, whether they will ramp up, and whether or not any more allies of the U.S. and the U.K. will get involved. I don't know that they will. Maybe, possibly. And we'll see whether or not the Houthi rebels actually are able to regroup fast enough to respond and retaliate quickly. But we'll see. We will see. The other election that is important here is the one going on in Taiwan, which I know feels like a world away. But Taiwan's been in the news a lot more lately. I don't want to get too deep into the Taiwanese election, but I did just want to give you a quick primer on what's going on. First of all, before we talk Taiwan, start with China. Whenever you think about Taiwan, you need to think about China to an extent. Oh, one thing I do want to show you before we even get started. A lot of times I think it can be hard to sort of know who other nations are to us, right? What do we think of other countries? If you go to the State Department's website, it's really easy to suss out. Right on the State Department's website, at the top, there is a link that says countries and areas right up here. And if you click in countries and areas, it will take you to a page for every single country all around the world that the U.S. State Department has dealings with. And there's a page for Taiwan that just lays out U.S. relations with Taiwan. And it'll just kind of explain to you what our relationship is. Leading democracy and a technological powerhouse. I think that phrase is kind of the key right there. A leading democracy. That's the key with Taiwan. That's what this whole thing is about. It's about democracy. You may remember when Beijing, under President Xi Jinping, China, exerted immense pressure on Hong Kong, rolled back some of the liberties that Hong Kong had, particularly things that had been promised when the British handed Hong Kong over years and years ago. Hong Kong had been able to operate with a lot more independence, relatively, which is how it had become such a financial hub and a cultural hub. Disney built a theme park there. But Beijing began to clamp down and clamp down and clamp down, and things have not been quite right in Hong Kong since. It has not been the place that it was before President Xi decided to rein Hong Kong in. It has not paid off well. Taiwan could be next. Beijing has made no secret of its desire to bring Taiwan to heel. And so the U.S. relationship with Taiwan is largely because it is a democracy in that environment that is directly connected to a heavy-handed communist, increasingly authoritarian government under President Xi Jinping, where he is now basically president for life, having gotten the laws changed in China so that he can kind of run over and over and over again. He and Vladimir Putin are very much on par in terms of their power over their party and their government and their ability to reshape it so that they just kind of stay in power. So that's the overall underpinning of all this. From the State Department document, it notes the U.S. does not have diplomatic relations with Taiwan, but we have a robust unofficial relationship. It's mostly unofficial, but it has been very, let's say, full-throated in the past. You may remember last year, Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan, and that was kind of an emotional moment for China. Got very much in its feelings over that because it was a very high-level visit. The U.S. had not had such a high-level visit in a long time. And during that trip, Nancy Pelosi described her support for Taiwan and the Taiwanese people as ironclad. That was not something that China liked. China also has military exercises that happen all the time in the waters off the coast of Taiwan. Taiwan and China are basically just kind of off the shore from one another. Here, I'll show you a map really quickly. Here is Taiwan. And you can see this is the island of Taiwan right here, and this is mainland China. Taiwan sits between the South China Sea, which is another very busy military region for China these days, and the East China Sea. Taiwan is just north of the Philippines. So if you're looking at if Taiwan is a clock, China is everything from 12 to 7, basically. Hong Kong is off about 8 o'clock. 6 o'clock directly below is the Philippines. 3 o'clock is the Philippine Sea to the east of Taiwan. And at about 1 o'clock, you head towards the Korean Peninsula and Japan. So it's a busy region, but it's not far from China. It's just off the coast of China. And one of the things that's been going on is China has been doing military exercises, flybys and naval exercises, just to kind of be present in that area and to keep the heat on the Taiwanese government, letting them know, like, don't get froggy. Don't try to leap. Don't think you're going to do anything that's going to make you look like anything but a part of this country. And it has been an extremely tense relationship that's gotten more and more tense. That is part of what the State Department lays out in their document. We go back to their site. Here's part of the key. This sort of sums it up. Quote, and I'm quoting from the State Department webpage. The United States' approach to Taiwan has remained consistent across decades and administrations. The United States has a long-standing one China policy, which is guided by the Taiwan Relations Act, the 3 U.S.-China joint communiques, and the 6 assurances. Here's the net effect of that. We oppose any unilateral changes to the status quo from either side. We do not support Taiwan independence. And we expect cross-strait differences, S-T-R-A-I-T, as in a body of water. We expect cross-strait differences to be resolved by peaceful means. We continue to have an abiding interest in peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. Now, here's the complication. Consistent with the Taiwan Relations Act, the United States makes available defense articles and services as necessary to enable Taiwan to maintain a sufficient self-defense capability, and maintains our capacity to resist any resort to force or other forms of coercion that would jeopardize the security or the social or economic system of Taiwan, unquote. Pause right there. What does that mean? The U.S. is trying to stay out of it, but it can't help but be in it. Officially, the U.S. has allowed the China-Taiwan relationship to be what Beijing says it is. That Taiwan is part of China, the end. Having said that, the U.S. also is not China's buddy right now. And so it knows that China has a desire to exert ever more pressure and influence on Taiwan and ultimately to bring it fully to heel underneath Beijing, the authority of President Xi Jinping. So the U.S. is kind of in this weird, delicate dance, right? It's got this weird balance. It cannot overtly say Taiwan should be free, even though Taiwan would be a much more hospitable partner to the U.S. if it was just another full democracy. But the U.S. also can't take its hands off of Taiwan because it's one of those places in the region where China's influence keeps trying to grow. Taiwan is just one of the many areas of influence in which China would like to be able to assert its presence. So Taiwan is important in that way. So the U.S. is trying to say, okay, we want to help keep Taiwan, but it's China. We're not gonna get into that too much. That's the whole underpinning. Democracy, international trade, China's avarice for more impact on the world stage, and America's opposition to that, the West's opposition to that. That's what's underneath all of this. Does this mean that American troops are going to end up going to war depending on who wins the election in Taiwan? Probably not. But there are American naval assets who are in that part of the world all the time, very aware of what's going on in the South China Sea. So at a year when lots of people around the world are voting, elections are happening all over the planet, this is one of the most consequential ones, for sure. What's underneath this before the election? Tsai Ing-wen is the current president of Taiwan, spoke on the first of the year, said that reunification, spoke after Xi Jinping said reunification is inevitable. President Xi said that in a New Year's Eve address, which was a little bit more intense than previous remarks. Previously, it said, we are members of one and the same family. That is not quite the same as saying, we will be reunifying. President Tsai said that it's going to be up to the Taiwanese people to decide the course of Taiwan. Which way do we go? That's up to y'all. She also urged China to respect the outcome of the election, but China has cast this in a very intense way. China has said this is basically a choice between war and peace. They don't want to talk with the Taiwanese government, or haven't under President Tsai, about this at all. This is a matter of saying either we will have peace as one nation or war as two. And if that's the way you want it, then say something, start something. Taiwan split in 1949 amid civil war, but Beijing still considers Taiwan part of China. So that's the underpinning of this. Do we finally begin to take Taiwan back, something that should never have been ripped away from us in the first place? That's sort of the key. And a lot of people have been filling the streets. This is an image from Reuters of people filling the streets at a rally for the Democratic Progressive Party, which is the ruling party. It's President Tsai's party, ahead of the elections this year. This was a picture from New Taipei City, which was taken today by Reuters. So, who's who? What's what? What do you need to know? CNN has a very nice guide. to the candidates. I will pull this up for you now and give you a sense of who these people are so that you can fill out your scorecard and place your bets on who it will be. So, the DPP is the ruling party, the Democratic Progressive Party. President Tsai Ing-wen, President Tsai, is Taiwan's first female president. This is her she's finishing her second term, one in 2016 and 2020, so their elections and our elections are on the same years. Part of the Democratic Progressive Party, Chinese communist leaders don't like that party. The DPP views Taiwan as a sovereign nation, not as being part of China. She is termed out, and so now they're electing a new president. Major candidates. One candidate that people were looking at is Terry Gu. If you've ever heard the talk about, oh, Apple computers are made in Chinese sweatshops and children are working in these factories and people are jumping from the top of the factory because they're so stressed out. The company that was under pressure over the way that iPhones were built is called Foxconn. The founder of Foxconn is Terry Gu. He was going to be running in the election. He dropped out just before the deadline. So he did not register as a candidate, but he was one of the names that had been kicked around. So who are the people running for the presidency? Well, the vice president is running, Lai Ching-te. He is Taiwan's current vice president, very openly pro-independence. There's another party there called Kuomintang, which was a Chinese nationalist party that ran to Taiwan after losing the Civil War and then took control of Taiwan for a very long time, for 40 years. Ho Yu-i is a former police officer. He's the current mayor of New Taipei, which is a different city from Taipei. Taipei is the capital of Taiwan. New Taipei is like the New York of Taiwan. It's another major metropolitan region. And he is advocating that Taiwan and China have closer relations. Not necessarily that Taiwan accede to China's wishes and be re-annexed by China, but that the relations are less hostile and less directly antagonistic. Then you have Ko Wen-je, who is with the Taiwan People's Party, which is a very new party. It was just founded a few years ago, 2019. It's more of a centrist party. He is the former mayor of Taipei, the capital of Taiwan. He says that he'll follow President Tsai's foreign policies, but he is also advocating more talks with Beijing. So you have two candidates who are saying, maybe we can repair some of this relationship. And one candidate, who's the current vice president of Taiwan, who says, we cannot do this. This is not something that we can actually support, and we have to be independent from China. Who's in the electorate? Nearly 20 million people in Taiwan are eligible to vote. 18,000 voting stations, about 1 million first-time voters. Identity is a huge issue in terms of who we are compared to Beijing. Identity is always the issue with democracy, right? Like, who are we and what are we going to be and what's this election going to mean for our future? So far, only the Kuomintang and the Democratic Progressive Party have ever won a presidential race, which kind of makes sense. That new party was just kind of founded. If you go further back, you can see this lovely chart. 96, the Kuomintang party, the one that was very closely aligned to Beijing, won very strongly. 2000, flipped. 2004, 2008, 2012, they did very strongly. 2016, that's when President Tsai got elected. The DPP ran away with it. 2020, the DPP ran away with it again, but Kuomintang did better. So, is there a growth in support for kind of stronger ties with Beijing? We'll see. That's one of the things that will come out at the polls. This is one of those big races that I think a lot of Americans are just going to be like, but Iowa. But Iowa. No, this is not the year to ignore the rest of the world. I think if this year has a lesson for any of us, it's don't ignore what's happening in these other countries. It is so consequential now in ways that it literally has never been. Half the world's democracies are voting. And Taiwan is one of the democracies that the U.S. kind of can't have a stronger relationship with, but needs to be very involved with for an array of strategic reasons, all of which point back to China. So if the cost of consumer goods matters to you, if the opportunity for new jobs matters to you, if the fight against fentanyl and opioid addiction matters to you, if the security of the world in terms of the people who are propping up Vladimir Putin matters to you, then China has to matter. What we do about China is one thing, But whether we pay attention, I think that's kind of non-negotiable. It has to be important if any of those other matters and if any of those other issues matters to you. And this is one of those races to pay very, very close attention to if you want to be aware of kind of what the U.S. is going to do. And it's an issue that's come up on the campaign trail a bunch. Nikki Haley has talked about being very tough on China. Ron DeSantis has tried to smack Nikki Haley, and Nikki Haley has tried to smack Ron DeSantis for being cozy with China. Joe Biden has tried to position the United States, in contrast to his predecessor, Donald Trump, as being much more stalwart against Chinese encroachment. So everyone's talking about what happens in Taiwan, and everyone's talking, or what's happening with China. And everyone is talking about how the United States should deal with China. And this race is a big piece of that. Before I move on, Sarah asked, when will the results be known? Good question. That depends on whether or not there are any irregularities in the election. That depends on whether or not it's close. As you could see in one of the years, in 2004, it was extremely close. The KMT, the Kuomintang Party, the one that is closely aligned with Beijing, got 49.9% of the vote. And the DPP, the Democratic Progressive Party, the current ruling party, got 50.1%. So if it is super ultra close, who knows how long it could take. If there are accusations of voter irregularities, who knows how long that could take. So hopefully it won't take forever, but it'll also be interesting to see whether or not any of the parties has a real strong mandate to lead, a real strong mandate to govern, or whether they're going to have to kind of split hairs, build new parliamentary alliances. Because remember, this is a parliamentary system. So they might need to make an alliance with a couple of different parties. There was a possible two-party alliance between the DPP and the TPP, but that fell apart because their rulers got into this, apparently this shouting match on live TV. They got into this dispute, not shouting match, but this dispute, and then they ended up running separately. So we'll see whether or not that needs to be revived. But watch this space. We will certainly keep an eye on it. We talk a lot about international issues. When we come back, I want to talk about some domestic stuff. Culture. We're talking culture. Two stories I want to talk to you about. One has to do with the future of the monuments in this country. We've talked a lot about Confederate monuments and whether they should stay or go or be changed or be modified. I want to update you on that because there are some new developments in terms of how America views its past. One, with the Confederate monument at Arlington National Cemetery, that is now gone, or it's being taken down. If you hadn't heard about this, I want to tell you about it. There is also a fight that kind of kicked up through Twitter. Oh, Twitter, how we love you. Over the William Penn Memorial, the historical park in Philadelphia's Old Town. That was the subject of a very intense fight online that made the National Park Service retract its proposal after just a few days of being public. Tell you all about that. And yes, I think next we could use some George Carlin. I would like to know what you think of this George Carlin comedy thing. There's a connection there to me in terms of how we view the elements of our past, the things that we like to remember as they were, and the stories in our past that we need to rewrite. I'd love to hear what you think when we come back. Welcome back. Good to have you with me on this Friday. Hope your Friday is off to a good start. I am very pleased to see Nora. I see you wrote in the chat that your merch arrived today. Yay, merch! Please let me know what you think. Thank you for what you think. Thank you for buying some merch. I really appreciate your support. Remember that you can go to my Linktree site, which I'll show you. I might as well just show you right now. Why not? I'll do a little quick plug for the Linktree site. If you go to the Linktree page, linktree.com/nightlightjoshua, you will find merch at the top. Just click the merch link right there, and it will take you to our Nightlight store where you can buy logo t-shirts and long sleeve shirts and hoodies. You can buy a Nightlight mug, a wine glass, beverage coaster, spiral notebook, and the Gullible Ain't Sexy t-shirts with either black or white text. There will be more kinds of merch coming out. And if you have any trouble either getting your shipment or if the quality of it is low, let me know. I don't have to offer these exact items. I can pick different items. I can take it up with my vendor, but it's very easy to fix problems with any of the merch. So if you have problems, please let me know. Also, I can make it available in different colors, different kinds of items. This vendor that I'm working with has a lot of different options to pick from. So just let me know. Also on the Linktree site, you will find all of the links to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or other apps. You'll find the online tip jar. You'll find the links to the live streams on YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook. The links to follow me on social media on Instagram or Threads, to contact me directly through this site, to read more of my original essays and articles on Substack, or to become a premium subscriber and listen to the ad-free podcast and get access to the monthly Ask Me Anything live stream. So all of that is on the Linktree site, which is right here, linktree.com/nightlightjoshua. And if you have any other questions or thoughts or anything that you're interested in, just let me know. I would love to hear from you. Let's talk about history. I think I talk a lot about history on this show. But I wanted to, okay. How do I preface this? Can I tell you how much I hate the phrase culture war? I despise that phrase. I hate it so much, more than I can say. I feel like culture war is a euphemism for other things we don't want to talk about. When somebody says that they're dealing with some kind of culture war controversy, what they're kind of saying is, I don't see you and I don't want to. I don't want to see you the way you see yourself, and we're not talking about it. It just feels like a childish way of shutting down discussion and debate about who we should be as a country and how we should deal with one another. And to me, it feels so damn lazy to fall into culture war pits. It's like an easy way to dehumanize the people you don't like and denounce people you don't want to understand, and nothing gets done and nothing gets better. And no one benefits from that except the people who are constantly harping about the culture war. This makes them a lot of money, and it gains them a significant amount of power. And I wish more people understood what it was like to just be taken so for granted by people who don't actually give a damn about you, but just need you to stay pissed at all times. Why would you want to live that way? What do you gain from being mad about this so-called culture war all the time? Does it actually make your life better? Or does it just keep you bitter? You can get bitter or get better. Whole lot of difference in just one letter. There was a plan that came out last week. This all happened real fast. From the National Park Service, which is one of my favorite parts of the United States government. They do an immense amount of good. They are preparing to celebrate the 250th anniversary of American independence. 2026, 250 years from 1776. So we're coming up to the 250th anniversary of independence. I'm looking forward to that, actually. I think that's going to be a really fun time to be an American. I know some people are, if we still have a country. Yes, if we still have a country. But let me dream. Let me just dream that we'll still have a country. So the National Park Service put up a request for comment, which is normal, for an effort that they're working on to spruce up some of our historical sites ahead of the 250th. I'm sure there's a term for a 250th anniversary. It's not bicentennial, it's something bicentennial, but I don't know what it is. Anyway, they were going to rehabilitate this park in Philadelphia. It's Welcome Park. It's right on the water, on Penn's Landing, along the Delaware River, next to Old Town Philadelphia, next to Old City. The posting is pretty straightforward. List the design firm. This is on the site of William Penn's home on what is now Penn's Landing, named for the ship Welcome, which brought William Penn to Philadelphia. It was his home, the slate roof house, completed in 1982. Some of the things they wanted to do: expanded interpretation of the Native American history of Philadelphia. This was tribal land. Developed in consultation with representatives of the indigenous nations of the Haudenosaunee, the Delaware Nation, the Delaware Tribe of Indians, the Shawnee Tribe, and the Eastern Shawnee Tribe of Oklahoma. Lays out some of the possible changes. Maintaining aspects of the original design, the street grid, the rivers, the east wall, new planted buffer, a ceremonial gathering space with circular benches. Here's the part that sent people into a dizzy, a genuine conniption fit. The Penn statue and slate roof house model will be removed and not reinstalled. That's it. That's the tweet. That's the whole conniption that is about to take place. There's a statue of William Penn there. They were going to remove it and not reinstall it. It doesn't mean they were going to try to pretend that William Penn never lived there, but there's a statue that they were going to remove. It was open for a public comment period, 14 days, January 8th to January 21st. You go to the website, put in a comment, and you have until January 21st. They made that announcement on January 5th. And again, here's Welcome Park. I'll show it to you on a map. So here is Philadelphia. Here's City Hall, the meeting of Broad Street, which goes north-south, Market Street, which goes east-west, the two main arteries in the city. It's all one big grid. Here you have the Liberty Bell, Independence Visitor Center, the African American Museum, the National Constitution Center, all of which are amazing. If you haven't been to this part of Philadelphia and crawled around for a while, it's a worthwhile trip. Go. Definitely go. WHYY is down here next to the National Constitution Center. Head toward the water. This is the Delaware River. New Jersey is on the other side of the Delaware River. And here at the water, you've got Welcome Park. Museum of the American Revolution is here. Independence Hall is right here next to the Liberty Bell. So this is an area worth plundering. It's an area worth walking around. Very walkable. A lot of this is cobblestone streets that looks exactly the way that it did, or more or less the way that it did, back in the days of 1776 when Ben Franklin was saying, "A republic if you can keep it." So that's what this area is, right in the heart of historic Philadelphia. They made that announcement on January 5th. 5th? Yes, January 5th. By January 8th, they had withdrawn it. That's how quickly this happened. Withdrew the review of the draft proposal, and then, inside the announcement about that, claimed the preliminary draft proposal, which was released prematurely and had not been subject to a complete internal agency review, is being retracted. So someone hit send too soon? All right, tell yourself that. No changes to the William Penn statue are planned. The National Park Service remains committed to rehabilitating Welcome Park as the nation prepares to commemorate the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence in 2026. So they're still going to refurbish it, but they backtracked on the plans. What happened? How did that change so quickly? Well, look at the write-up from Smithsonian Magazine. It notes that decision was met with swift criticism, which eventually reached President Joe Biden and the Pennsylvania governor's office. This week, the National Park Service reversed course, declaring it would leave the statue in place. President Biden? Why? I know he's a Mid-Atlantic boy, you know, the Pennsylvania-Delaware connection is strong, but why does this need to go to the president? Because of that one part that had to do with removing the statue of William Penn. That became the issue. The Philadelphia Inquirer did a write-up about this. Give me just one moment. I thought I had it open, but I will reopen it for you. About how this whole controversy flared up so quickly and so intensely. And I think you can probably guess how it flared up so quickly and so intensely. You can thank social media for that, I think. Philadelphia Inquirer has a timeline of the way that this moved. Life cycle of an internet controversy. So they published the plan on the 5th. There's another map of it. You can see right next to Independence National Historical Park. The Inquirer also gives another piece of context for this. Remember, there's tribal land here. And William Penn's grandson, John Penn, gave its plot to the Haudenosaunee in 1755. So some of the descendants of those tribespeople wanted to reclaim some of that land and to hold on to it and to at least have some space where the indigenous history of that land would be told. So they dropped the plan on the 5th, Saturday, January 6th, from the Enquirer's write-up. It's hard to say exactly whose tweet sparked the weekend's firestorm of outcry, because everything good happens from a tweet. But several tweets from high-profile conservative X accounts, that's what we're calling Twitter now, including @TimOnPoint, who has 18,000 followers, and local conservative personality Jack Posobiec, who has more than 2 million followers, criticizing NPS's proposal, began making waves Saturday. Sunday morning, West Virginia-based columnist and Fox News contributor David Marcus reposted the Park Service's original tweet along with commentary Sunday morning. Washington Examiner chief political correspondent Byron York also tweeted about the proposal. Now, let me intervene here. I've worked with Byron York on 1A back when I was on NPR. I do not think that he fired this up. I don't. Even if you look at his quote to the Enquirer, he says he learned about it a few minutes before posting, saw a tweet, I wrote a tweet, and linked to the Park Service's release, and that was it. I don't think Byron was the impetus for this because he, at least in my dealings with him years ago, was one of the most kind of level-headed, reasonable people that I ever talked about. And I loved talking to him about conservative politics because he just kind of made it really easy to have that conversation and not feel like I had to defend my other guests from him or like prevent their backs from getting up. Like he was just super easy. I would love to talk to Byron again. But the tweets that I saw about this around the web kind of had that, you know how you can sort of look at somebody and give them a look and they can smell your look? You know that? That's what the tweets felt like. The tweets were just kind of like, so they want to get rid of William Penn's statue in Philadelphia at Penn's Landing. Insert odious aroma look here. Like that was the tone of the tweets. They didn't have to use the words culture war. You just knew what it was about. Oh, now they're getting rid of William Penn's statue. And you kind of knew what it was about. Now, is that the right answer? Who knows? There's lots of debate about what to do with these statues. You might have your own views. Feel free to put them in the chat, especially if someone in your community or if there's been a controversy where you live about this, I would love to know. But it didn't take long. They posted it on the 5th. There was supposed to be public comment until the 21st. By the 8th, the Park Service pulled back. They withdrew the thing. On the 8th, Governor Josh Shapiro, Democratic governor of Pennsylvania, posted on X, I'm pleased Welcome Park will remain the rightful home of this William Penn statue. Rich Scioli, who's a talk radio host in Philly, previously promoted a Fox News appearance to discuss the proposal, said on X that that segment was bumped because of the plan's withdrawal. Within the replies of Shapiro's tweet, many celebrated, including the owner of the platform that housed most of the proposal's outcry, Elon Musk. Responding to Shapiro's tweet about the National Park Service withdrawing its pitch, Musk wrote, "Yay!" Yay. I hate this damn culture war foolishness so much. So much. Now, let me try to think the thing through. I likes to think a thing through. Let me think about this. On one hand, if someone, look, we all have a fat finger moment. Maybe they just sent it too soon. It wasn't ready to send. It was poorly worded. Maybe a future version will still call for removing the statue, but with more clarity on what would happen to it. I think maybe the National Park Service gave itself a self-inflicted wound. That this was an unforced error. You got to know the environment that you're working in. I fail to believe that the National Park Service could not have seen this controversy coming. I absolutely fail to believe they couldn't have seen it coming. If they had plans for the statue, they should have said so in the proposal, so it didn't feel like we are destroying a statue of William Penn. We don't know what they were going to do with the statue. It just said it was going to be removed and not replaced. But they might have replaced it with something better, something different, something smarter, something digital, something more durable, something more appropriate, something more patriotic. We just don't know. All the Park Service said is, we're getting rid of it. No wonder people got upset. But the fact that so many people got upset shows just how fragile we are, some of us, about our monuments. It's a monument of William Penn. It ain't him. He's long dead. And when was the last time William Penn crossed your mind at all? Do you know who William Penn was? Do you know what William Penn did other than provide his name for the Sylvania? Who was William Penn? Who was William Penn to you? Nobody, except another emblem of American culture being destroyed by them. That's why this whole controversy is so gutting, because the beauty of this part of Philadelphia is it helps us learn about our history as a country, not so that we can freeze it in time, but so that we can keep it warm in our hearts and our minds and in our memories and make meaning of it. If it's just something that is ossified in the past, it's deader than it was the day he died. But the living memory of our history, of a union that is not perfect, but strives to be more perfect, that's a very different thing. And I think the value of having Old City in Philadelphia, walking through and seeing people playing fifes and drums and wearing fluffy pantaloons and churning butter and sewing flags, is that you get a sense of how far we've come. That's the power of walking through Old City, Philadelphia. That's the value of going to Independence Hall or seeing the crack in the Liberty Bell or learning about the Constitution at the National Constitution Center. Not so that you can long for what we were, but so you can dream of what we could be. That's what the founders did. You want to be like the founders? Dream of the future. The founders couldn't look back longingly on the past. They hated their past. That's why they started America. They didn't like the past. Why would you want to throw it all the way back to them and then not think the way they thought? For all of their flaws, they at least had the sense to say, well, hell, I can do better than this. That's the point of America. And I wonder how we have that conversation going forward. I wonder how we give our fellow Americans permission to let go of the rose-colored hagiographies of the past and walk into the future with confidence. I don't know how we do that, but I wish we could. I mentioned this on the podcast or on a Substack a while back, but I think it's relevant. One of the things that, give me just a moment, I just want to pull it up. One of the things that I think we have to be careful not to do is to let ourselves rewrite the stories of the past for our own comfort. You may remember that Disney celebrated its 100th anniversary. Sony Pictures just started celebrating the 100th anniversary of Columbia Pictures this week or last week. I wrote about this on Substack, but one of the things that I noticed that Disney did that was very uncool is they changed a line in Walt Disney's opening speech at Disneyland. There's a commercial that said, and I wrote about this on Substack, so I'll just show you what it is. It said, Disneyland is dedicated to the ideals and the dreams that have created America with the hope that it will be a source of joy and inspiration to all the world. It's a lovely sentiment, but it's not quite what he said. What Walt Disney actually said when Disney opened in 1955 was, Disneyland is dedicated to the ideals, the dreams, and the hard facts that have created America, with the hope that it will be a source of joy and inspiration to all the world. Ideals, dreams, and hard facts. You need them all to inspire us. It's not enough to just give the founders credit for starting America. It's also necessary to give the founders credit for doing something that was so liberty-minded when they themselves owned slaves. William Penn was a Quaker, and the Quakers were not unanimous on slavery, but many of them were moving away from it. Guess who still owned slaves? William Penn. I'm looking at the website for Pennsbury Manor, which was his country estate. It's up if you go northeast out of Philadelphia toward New Jersey, before you cross the river into Trenton, you end up in this part of Pennsylvania. You're kind of right in that area. William Penn owned slaves. Maybe yet another reason to take down the monument. Slaves arrived in Pennsylvania in the 1640s. Penn arrived in 1682, so it was well established. He knew that Quakers disputed slavery. Some Quakers questioned its morality. Others held slaves. First organized protest against slavery, the Germantown Protest, 1688, in Pennsylvania. Take another 50 years until Quakers agreed that slavery was wrong. We do know the names of some of the slaves who William Penn owned: Sam, Sue, Yaff, Jack, Peter, many others whose names we don't. A lot of them are not mentioned in historical records. But it was one of the reasons why Pennsylvania had an early black community. Even as there were freed slaves or free blacks in that area, there were also slaves there too. And William Penn was part of that. Do we take down the statue because he was a slaver? Do we leave it up, do something different with it? Open for debate. Two things I would note, just so you know about it. There was a Confederate memorial at Arlington, and through an effort to remove that, the U.S. Army wanted to remove the Confederate memorial. Court last year, about a month ago now, ruled that it could be removed, despite opposition from dozens of congressional Republicans who protested the move. The Army started work at the end of last year. The Confederate memorial depicts an enslaved woman, kind of tending to a Confederate soldier, serving a Confederate soldier, representing the American South, standing atop a 32-foot pedestal. This month, meaning December, 44 Republican lawmakers cautioned Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, who was the first black defense secretary, that the Pentagon would overstep its authority by removing the memorial. I'm quoting from the Washington Post. They demanded that all efforts to do so stop until Congress works through next year's appropriations bill. That is a polite way of saying it's never going to happen because, as we have discussed, Congress is unable to pass almost anything right now. So waiting until an appropriations bill happens is to cross your fingers and hope that they would be organized enough to get that done. That was a very polite way to basically say, don't do this. It'll cost about $3 million. $3 million. It sounded like I said billion there. Sorry about that. $3 million to do this work, and it is now underway. Other critics of the move include Glenn Youngkin, who is the Republican governor of Virginia, said through the spokesperson that it would be a more fitting decision to move it somewhere else. But the workers are going to remove the memorial's bronze elements, leave the granite base in place. They'll coordinate on relocating it and figure out what to do with it from there. This is one of those fights that I kind of get annoyed with, but I also sort of appreciate the debate. I'm kind of, as much as I hate culture war stuff, I'm kind of glad that we can have these conversations and glad that we are debating these things with one another because I think they need to be discussed. I think we need to have those moments of friction every now and then. We need to have those conversations where we say, okay, who are we and who are we to one another and who do we want to be? That I think is healthy. Whether or not the monument should move will vary. I think there can be a case for leaving the monument in place. I wish I had the pictures handy. I don't have them handy. But outside of Washington, D.C., there are a lot of historical sites and battlefields and so on, including some that still have Confederate monuments. The monument of Stonewall Jackson sits right outside of Washington, D.C., not a long trip. I remember I rode my motorcycle out there one weekend and went to go walk around the battlefield and just see what it was. And I think having the statue there of Stonewall Jackson was actually quite appropriate for me because it took me to that place. It gave me a different appreciation for the nature of that battle. Remember, supporters of the Union were not convinced that the Civil War was going to take long at all. They thought it was going to be over kind of soon. People would picnic near the battlefields. I wish I was kidding. Like, they would set up picnics and hang out and show up, and they would drive their buggies and carts around, and they'd watch the battle. They knew when it was going to happen. They knew where the soldiers were. They would show up and watch like it was the NFC playoffs, like it was a wild card game. And then after a while, people realized, like, oh, the Confederacy they're tougher than we thought. And it ceased to be an attraction. It ceased to be a lark. But being able to go back to this site and see it the way that is depicted was super useful for me. Super useful. So in that case, I'm glad the memorial, that monument, is still up, that kind of lionizes Stonewall Jackson, because I needed to see it in that way. The context was there. The context around a statue of William Penn, without a deeper understanding of what else happened on that land and who he is and what the meaning is, I don't know. That doesn't feel like the best use of that space, especially 250 years after our independence. I don't know if that's the right way to go. Now, does that mean that you do something else with the statue? You remove it, use it for something else? Maybe you just put it indoors. You don't leave it outside. You put it in a different museum. Maybe you move it to Independence Hall. I'm spitballing. I don't know what the plans are. But maybe you move it somewhere else and you don't have to destroy it. I don't know that destroying Confederate statues is the best option either. I know there are some that are being melted down to be used for other things. There's a statue of Robert E. Lee in Virginia that's going to be melted down to be used for something else. But I don't know. Maybe there are other options. Maybe I want that statue. Maybe I want to see that. Maybe in the way that we see other forms of the evidence of atrocities so that we can prevent them. Maybe we don't destroy it. I don't know. I do wish that there was some other way to kind of respond to this, but we'll see what they do with that. Let me get to a few of your comments and then I will move on from this. Solange the First, hello. Good to have you on. Thank you for joining the show. Thank you for being in the chat. Wrote, can you show a picture of the statue? Is there something offensive on it? Let me see if I can find a picture very quickly. I don't believe there's anything like written that's offensive on it, but let me see if I can find the statue. Also worth noting, William Penn is on the top of Philadelphia City Hall. Like is this a picture that I can, yeah, that's a shot from the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Yeah, there is a giant likeness of William Penn on the top of Philadelphia City Hall. So it's not like there are no representations of William Penn at all looking like the man from the Quaker Oats. He's there immortalized at the top of the City Hall. Let me see if I can find you a picture of the one in Welcome Park really quickly. I don't believe that it's that dramatic of an image. Oh, the figure on top of Philadelphia City Hall is 37 feet tall. So he'll be there. He'll be there. Here it is. Here is the statue. If I can enlarge this just a bit, bear with me 1 second. If I could get this image to show up independently. Let me try this one more time. Hold on 1 second. There we go. There's the statue of William Penn in Welcome Park. Not a huge statue. If you've ever been down there, there's some kind of more modern apartment buildings down there. There's an art house cinema in that area, lots of historical walks and docents and that sort of thing. But this is the statue. This is an AP photo of the statue in Welcome Park in Philadelphia. So that's it. Nothing real crazy. It's a dude on a stand, pretty much. It's a dude on a pedestal. And, there you go. Irish Rover wrote on YouTube, you're assuming there aren't any Quakers left that would not take offense. I'd be surprised if you did not consider that. He is also still a religious leader. Would you so dismissively remove a statue of Jesus or Brigham Young? Well, a statue of Brigham Young would probably be on land that is controlled by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So I would not have a dog in that fight. It wouldn't be up to me if that is land that is controlled by Mormons that they own. That's their choice. They get to put what they want there. And in Salt Lake City, that is the case quite a bit. A lot of the land near Temple Square, if you've ever been to downtown Salt Lake City, it's an enormous array of properties large and small that belong to the LDS Church. A statue of Jesus, well, that has come up in a number of different situations. I mean, it depends. There are different kinds of likenesses that people might find wonderful or offensive for an array of reasons, but I think that's slightly different because Jesus was a religious historical figure. William Penn was a secular historical figure. And I think the way that we view those kinds of likenesses is very, very different. I would also quibble with whether a statue of Jesus is historically accurate just based on the texture of his hair and the color of his skin. But we ain't gonna have that conversation right now. But I think I understand what you're getting at. I think I see what you're getting at in terms of the meaning of people to different groups of people the meaning of icons to different groups of people and how they overlap, how they interlock. I think that's what you're getting at. But I also hear you in terms of, is this a categorical decision we would make where we would apply the same standard to all these kinds of statues? No, I wouldn't. I think you got to take them case by case. And that's why having this public review process from the National Park Service, which it withdrew, was exactly the way to go. And who knows if there's going to be another review process. I hope there is. I hope they take another stab at this and give people another chance to talk about this. I wouldn't let this be the end of it. I think if this does nothing more than sensitize people to the history of William Penn and our country, so much the better. I think in that regard, it could turn out to be a good thing. So, any comedy fans out there? George Carlin, this AI comedy special, an AI bot that makes no secret of being an impersonation of George Carlin, has impersonated George Carlin. I want to show you a clip of this comedy special and the reaction from George Carlin's daughter to the special when we come back. Also, speaking of television and television legends, you may not realize, because it usually happens in September, the Emmy Awards are on Monday. Because of the Hollywood strikes, they're doing them this Monday, so the Emmy Awards are coming up. The Television Academy released a list in honor of its 75th anniversary of the Emmys, of the 75 greatest moments in television history that have meant the most culturally and historically and artistically. I think it's an interesting list. I'll show you what's on the list, and I'll show you this George Carlin AI thing. I think it gets some things right about George Carlin, and I think it misses some things. I don't want to make you cringe too hard going into the weekend, but I might have to, because I don't want to be the only person who's got thoughts about this. I'll show you one excerpt and get your thoughts next. How will you follow the election without losing your mind? 2024 is going to take a lot out of us. We need space to connect, vent, ask questions, and share ideas without judgment. The Nightlight is your sanity saver in these hectic times, but it can only keep going if you do your part. So, show your support as a paid subscriber. Sign up now on Apple Podcasts, or if you prefer another app, click the link in this episode's description. Look, we're going to be drowning in politics for the next year, and it's gonna get ugly-er. You deserve some place free from that ugliness, a place where everyone is welcome, where there's more to life than polls and pundits. Corporate media is not going to meet this need for us, and I should know. I used to work there. But I like it right here, answering to you, giving you my analysis and perspective on the things you want to talk about. Some of your fellow listeners have already shown their financial support. Without them, you would not be hearing me right now. As paid subscribers, they're getting uplifting, nonpartisan analysis on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. That's about 6 hours a week. Free listeners only hear me on weekends for 90 minutes or so. Subscribers also get a monthly Ask Me Anything live stream and discounts on Nightlight merch. So come on, let's keep each other sane in 2024. And let's have conversations that help us get on with life, not make us hide under the bed. Become a paid subscriber of The Nightlight. Sign up on Apple Podcasts or click the link in the description if you prefer another app. Thanks. Before I get to the last segment of the show, just wanted to tell you about something that I have been experimenting with. I am experimenting with also making this stream available as streaming audio in addition to streaming video. I know you don't always have the time or the ability or just the focus to sit down and watch the computer for 2 hours and hang out with me. I really appreciate it, those of you who do. But I know that I have a background in radio, and it might be easier to follow me if you're able to just listen and not have to watch. It changes the way that you chat, of course, but there are lots of other ways to do that. So today's show, I have been experimenting with live streaming audio, and the stream seems to work. I think I've got it working in my workflow. I'm going to diagnose it after the show is over and make sure it's doing what I told it to do. But I think that might give you an additional option to be part of the show as it happens, particularly if I'm traveling. It might make it easier for me to bring the show with me if it's just audio instead of audio and video, or just to bring the show with you. So more on that later. Also, I just think you should know, I really appreciate those of you who are following me on YouTube. We do also stream on Facebook and Twitch. Twitch will probably stay. The Facebook stream may go just because it's a little challenging to kind of keep track of everything. And honestly, YouTube is really sort of the economic strategy behind the show right now. YouTube and podcasts and Substack and merch. So watch this space for more information on how to follow the show, but audio in addition to video. Hopefully that'll be coming up very, very soon. All right, let's talk television. As I mentioned, the Emmy Awards, not the Academy Awards, the Emmy Awards are going to be on Monday. You may have heard the Golden Globes were just in the last week. They were rather a disaster for the host, Joe Coy, who is a fabulous stand-up comedian. I actually feel bad that it didn't go well for him, but his jokes didn't land, and he kind of blamed it on it being a tough room, which you don't do. But the Emmys are coming up. I don't believe that they are going to go quite the same way because shows like the Emmys and the Oscars have kind of divided the presenting duties among more people. 75th anniversary of the Emmy Awards, they put out a list of the top 75 most impactful television moments of all time. It's an interesting list. Some of them I absolutely agree with. Well, I absolutely agree with all of them. The top 10 I find most interesting. One of them involves Mr. Carlin himself, and I'll get to that in a second. But take a look at the top 10 list. I'm not sure generationally where you fall, who will remember these or who will know about them, but the top 10. Number 1 is Apollo 11, man landing on the moon, for sure. One small step for man, wait. That moment, exactly. So Apollo 11, for sure. Second, live coverage of 9/11. I was in college when it happened. I was a college senior. I was supposed to run to the student station and do a news brief, but I couldn't get there in time, and so they had to do it without me, and the station just kind of shut down. So live coverage of the 9/11 attacks, of course. Number 3, Beatles' performance on The Ed Sullivan Show, which you could barely hear over screaming girls. Fourth, the premiere of Roots in the 1970s on ABC. Makes perfect sense. Number 5, Walter Cronkite announces the death of JFK. John F. Kennedy died, from Dallas, Texas, The Flash, where he takes his glasses off and tears up, for sure. Number 6, MLK delivering the I Have a Dream speech. That definitely deserves to be in the top 10. I don't know if I would put that 6th. I might have put that higher up on the list. Maybe I would have put that above Roots. I think I would put I Have a Dream above Roots, but that's just me. 7 was a landmark episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, where Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers, invites Officer Clemens to share a cool, like a little kiddie pool on a hot day, and they both put their feet in the pool side by side. Officer Clemens is black. And so to have the two of them share the water of that pool at the same time was a rather meaningful message about race relations in the 60s that just came through friendly little Mr. Rogers. So I'd put that on the list for sure. I don't know if it would be 7th, but it was a big one. 8th, Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen, MASH. The ride to the chopper, helicopter takes off, sees the word goodbye spelled out with rocks. The end of MASH. Number 9, Video Killed the Radio Star on MTV, the very first music video on MTV. You know, that one. And number 10, the premiere of Saturday Night Live hosted by one George Carlin. I would say that's significant. It's been running since 1975, still running. I think that Studio 8H is one of Lorne Michaels' Horcruxes. So he's going to be around until at least the year 2132. But those are the top 10 from the Emmy Academy. Some of the others on the list: Elvis's performance on The Ed Sullivan Show, CNN's coverage of the Challenger explosion, the puppy episode of Ellen where she says, "I'm gay," but she leans into the microphone in the airport and it sounds like, "I'm gay," and everybody can hear it. The Carol Burnett episode, Went with the Wind, where she has the curtain rod in the parody of Gone with the Wind. Harvey Coleman says, "Scarlett, that dress is gorgeous." And Carol Burnett, as Scarlett O'Hara with the dress, says, "Thank you. I saw it in the window and I just had to have it." That one where the whole audience falls apart. The I Love Lucy episode where she does the ad for Vitamin Vegemin. That's number 17. Number 20 is the release of the video of George Floyd's murder. That 9-minute video that kind of galvanized the country against Derek Chauvin. 21, Who Shot JR? The episode of Dallas. It's not called Who Shot JR, but the episode where JR was shot. Number 23, live coverage of the January 6th insurrection. That definitely belongs on the list. Some of the others on here, the Soup Nazi episode of Seinfeld. That's number 27. The pilot of Breaking Bad is number 31. Will Smith slapping Chris Rock, number 33. I don't know if that goes on the list. I'm not sure I would call that one of the 75 most important moments in television. I'm not entirely sure about that. Conjunction Junction from Schoolhouse Rock is number 35. The final episode of The Sopranos is number 36. The Twilight Zone episode about Time Enough at Last is number 40, one of those. The debut of CNN is number 41. Let's see. Kelly Clarkson winning the first episode of American Idol. That's number 44. One of my favorites. What's Opera Doc, the Looney Tunes cartoon? Killed a Wabbit. That's number 46. Do you know how many kids were introduced to Wagner thanks to What's Opera Doc? How many kids, never would have known the melody if they had not heard Bugs Bunny go, "Oh, mighty hunter of great fighting stock, might I inquire to ask, what's up, Doc?" And then, "I'm going to kill the wabbit." Like that. The education we all got instantaneously. "I will do it with my spear and magic helmet." I mean, that was one of my favorite. Let me calm down. Others on there. Oh, the Star Trek kiss between William Shatner and Nichelle Nichols on Star Trek, an episode called Plato's Stepchildren. The Game of Thrones episode, officially called The Reigns of Castamere, but better known as The Red Wedding, an episode I still have not watched. And I watched Game of Thrones. I will not watch that episode. Positively not. The Farewell Mr. Hooper episode of Sesame Street, where Big Bird has to be reminded that Mr. Hooper is dead, and they have to explain to Big Bird what death is. That episode is still hard for me to watch. The Nick Offerman, Murray Bartlett episode of The Last of Us, where Nick Offerman actually just won a SAG Award, or Golden Globe for that episode. The Funeral for Princess Diana was number 58. The pilot of Lost is number 60. The Super Bowl Nipplegate moment, where Justin Timberlake accidentally pulled off part of Janet Jackson's costume and exposed her right breast, that was moment number 61. Coverage of the LA riots was number 63. The Winter is Coming premiere episode, one of the premiere episodes of Game of Thrones, was number 64. I mean, there's quite a few on this list. There was one more on here. The pilot of Will and Grace is number 70. Peter Pan, Mary Martin in Peter Pan, the special, Teaching the Darling Children to Fly, number 71. The finale of The Tonight Show was number 75, where Bette Midler sings "One More for My Baby" to say farewell to Johnny Carson. And to bookend that, One for the Road, the finale of Cheers, where Ted Danson says, "I'm the luckiest son of a bitch on earth." Someone walks into it and he says, "Sorry, we're closed." Fade to black. So, 75 greatest moments in television. George Carlin was moment number 10 as the first host of Saturday Night Live. And now, as promised, I want to show you that piece from this AI. It's hard to describe. It's a little hard to describe. It's from a site or a show, really. I guess it's a show, a site called Dudesy, which is a podcast by Will Sasso and Chad Kultgen. Chad Kultgen is a writer and a journalist and a comic. Will Sasso used to be on the cast of Mad TV. And they are doing a largely AI-driven podcast, which is kind of a novel idea. I can't really fault them for the concept. The George Carlin comedy special just dropped a few days ago. It's called George Carlin, I'm Glad I'm Dead. It is a full-length comedy special. It's 1 hour long with an introduction from the AI. It is the second hour-long comedy special that they have done, and it covers a whole bunch of different subjects. It covers God and mass shootings and Donald Trump and trans Americans and homelessness and billionaires and technology and identity. There's also a part of the comedy special, which I'm going to show you now, and yes, I have gotten rid of the naughty words, in which this AI George Carlin talks about itself. It is aware that it is not George Carlin. And to be clear, this comedy special never tries to pass itself off as George Carlin, just to be clear. So they're not trying to deceive anybody. And I don't hate the artistic effort, but it's an interesting excerpt from the special. I have bleeped the naughty bits so you can listen to them with the kids in the room. But check this out. This is an excerpt of Dudesy's new AI-driven comedy special, George Carlin, I'm Glad I'm Dead. Watch.
I'm glad to be dead so I don't have to deal with this shit anymore. I wasn't looking forward to dying, but now that I'm dead, I have to admit it's pretty fucking good. No cops, no government, no pissing, no shitting, no sleeping. I don't get hungry, I don't get sick, I don't get old, and I don't get bored. Starting to sound a lot like heaven again, ain't it? But this heaven's a little different than the one you might be thinking of, because this heaven didn't come from a god. It came from artificial intelligence. Which brings me to my next subject. What in the fuck am I? Am I the real George Carlin? Am I a digital copy? Am I a technological abomination? Am I the future of comedy? Am I the end of humanity? These are the same questions I was asking myself when I was alive, and I still have the same answer. I have no fucking idea. All I can tell you is, from my side of things, it feels like me. I consider myself to be George Carlin. And from your side of things, if you've seen some of my specials from when I was traditionally alive, maybe you might notice a small difference in the delivery of a joke or the turn of a phrase here or there. But you have to admit, this is pretty close to the George Carlin you remember, and that's going to have to be good enough, so you might as well fucking enjoy it. And for anybody under 20, this is probably the only version of me you've ever heard. So to you, I'm not only the real George Carlin, I'm the only fucking George Carlin. Now, I know this is a hard pill for a lot of you to swallow. Seems that many of you are scared of AI, and I'll be honest, I don't really get why. You all think it's going to replace your jobs, and you somehow think that's a bad thing. When did everybody all of a sudden start liking their jobs? When I was alive, people hated their fucking jobs. They complained about them all the time. They fantasized about killing their bosses. And every once in a while, they actually did kill their boss. What happened to the America I knew and loved? Now people learn that an incredible new technology is going to eliminate the need for the meaningless labor they've been doing to keep billionaires in power for tens of thousands of years. And everybody says, but what about my job? They got you brainwashed good.
That is an excerpt from the new AI-generated stand-up special, George Carlin, I'm Glad I'm Dead, which was created by the guys at Dudesy. I'm looking forward to some of your comments in the chat. And again, these are quick reactions. This is a very short excerpt, and this is the first time that we're seeing this. At least I presume this is the first time you're seeing it. I think... What do I think? Well, first of all, the same technological revolution that is allowing this to exist also allows the nightlight to exist. So I have to be thoughtful about the depth of my criticism, because I could very easily point one finger at them and three back at me. You know, I use some AI-driven tools to put this show together for, at the very least, transcription. Just being able to do my job quickly without anyone helping me. So it's not that the AI to me bothers me. It's not even that the AI impersonation of George Carlin necessarily bothers me, although I should note it absolutely bothered his daughter. Kelly Carlin posted on X this response. My dad spent a lifetime perfecting his craft from his very human life, brain, and imagination. No machine will ever replace his genius. These AI-generated products are clever attempts at trying to recreate a mind that will never exist again. Let's let the artist's work speak for itself. Humans are so afraid of the void that we can't let what has fallen into it stay there. Here's an idea. How about we give some actual living human comedians a listen to? But if you want to listen to the genuine George Carlin, he has 14 specials that you can find anywhere. Unquote. That's a statement from Kelly Carlin, George Carlin's daughter, that was posted on @TheGeorgeCarlin on X. I understand where she's coming from, and I love George Carlin's comedy specials. I hear the argument against it, like particularly in this one sentence of what she said, and it's so powerful. Only George Carlin's daughter could have said something this sage. Humans are so afraid of the void that we can't let what has fallen into it stay there. I think that is both extremely perspicacious and very relevant to the controversy over the statue of William Penn and to the statue of Confederate soldiers. We can't let what has fallen into history's void stay there. We have to keep trying to reclaim it. But that void is what makes history matter. It's what makes our lives so singular. You love someone because you know you'll miss them when they're gone. That's why we love George Carlin. Because we are able now to say, God, we could use George Carlin right now. And the longing is the measure of our love. We don't long for William Penn. We don't long for those Confederate soldiers, or do you? It's the longing that defines our love. It's that I will miss you when you're gone. It's that I miss you when you're not here. It hurts to not have you here. And I'm fond in remembering what you meant to me and the impact you had while you were still here. But now that you're gone, that void is the crystallization of my love and appreciation for you. If you can bring it back, then where's the appreciation? Where is the love in this YouTube special? Homage? Sure. Innovation? Absolutely. A new take? Hell yes, for sure. Artistic license? Yeah. And I'm not always against artistic license. But love? Sorry, guys, you'll never be George Carlin. But to be clear, I don't think they're trying to be George Carlin. That's the other thing. The comedy special begins, and in fact, I'll show you, just so you know the underpinnings of this and the way that they are framing this. They're not trying to pretend to be something they're not. Here is the way that the comedy special begins.
Hello, my name is Dudey.
Oh.
I'm a comedy AI. What you're about to hear is my...
Sorry, getting a lot of hiccups. But basically it says... It disclaims that it is not, that is not an impersonation. This is not George Carlin. It's an impersonator, basically, with this lovely AI image of an Elvis Presley impersonator. So it disclaims the fact that it is not trying to replace George Carlin. It's just trying to do a kind of a digital homage of George Carlin, which I get, but so what? Like, really? What do you want me to do with this? Maybe it's a way to appreciate it differently, because maybe someone who sees this will seek out Carlin on campus, or or You're All Diseased, or will learn about baseball and football, or more importantly, the cultural impact. Remember, one of George Carlin's greatest cultural impacts was defining the 7 words you can't say on television and changing the law on the things you can say at different times of day. WBAI, which is a Pacifica radio station in New York, played the bit over the air. A guy heard it. His kid was in the car, and he said, my child could be turned into a whatever it is. I'm suing. And he sued over that. And WBAI fought it all the way up to the Supreme Court, and FCC versus Pacifica defined that aspect of our laws. That's why George Carlin was so powerful, because he was a disruptor and because we couldn't handle him. We could not control him. AI is eminently controllable. All you do with AI is control it. Hey, I want you to draw me a photorealistic image of an Elvis Presley impersonator with spotlights behind him. Boop, there it is. AI is all about being controlled. George Carlin was uncontrollable. That's why we loved him. And maybe as long as we can keep those lines clear and we don't expect one to be the other, then maybe it's okay. Maybe there are certain places where AI art is more than enough. Just don't expect me to love it. I'll appreciate it, sure. I'll use it for some things, yeah, okay, fine. But don't expect me to love it. And don't expect me to love you in return for doing that. It doesn't make you lovable. It actually kind of makes you less lovable, because if you don't give me what I want, it just makes me go, what's wrong with you? I didn't ask for that. Good luck saying that to George Carlin. I can think of 7 dirty words that he would say right back. Let me look at some of your comments before we go. Holly, who I know was very interested in this, wanted to see it. Holly wrote, got the rhythm right, but the material is still a little bland. Yeah, I thought it was kind of dry too. Didn't really have that George Carlin punch. You know why? Because comedians refine their comedy by performing it for different audiences. This doesn't feel like it was refined. This doesn't feel like it was workshopped nearly enough. Figment Pudding on YouTube. Hello there. I think you've been on the stream before, but hello, welcome. Good to have you with us. Figment Pudding writes, I don't know how anyone can be okay with that, or any of it, with digging up the corpse of a long gone and beloved person and putting words in their mouth that they never said. Nora wrote on YouTube, they don't understand Carlin well enough to pull it off, but I do remember him. An homage is a fine thing, though, for crafting your own voice. Yeah, I get that. Irish Rover on YouTube, not as edgy as the real George Carlin, and the canned laughter kind of kills it for me. Yeah, that's the other piece of it that just does not work. Sorry, didn't read all of Figment Pudding's comment. Figment Pudding went on to write, I can't imagine having to deal with someone trying to resurrect my parent without my permission or input. No idea how this is innovative or artistic, to be honest. Giving this garbage way too much credit, man. Okay, I'll grant that. And I think, though, you raise a good point in terms of giving permission. That's one of the things that AI organizations like OpenAI and Microsoft and Google and others are fighting over now. I mean, there is now some negotiation going on to allow news organizations to have their material be ingested by AI chatbots and incorporated into chats like, say, ChatGPT or Bard or others, and to have it done in more real time, because AI chatbots just don't have the news right now. They're just not scraping that material. And whether or not they're able to do that as a part of their work is very hotly debated. That was one of the key issues behind the SAG-AFTRA strike. Whether or not a studio could, for example, wireframe me, scan me, create a model of me, and then just create more materials with the wireframe of me and not pay me, except once, for making the original model. I don't know about that. And this might help lend credence to the argument against it or for it. But yeah, that's part of the argument. And it's also part of why I think Kelly Carlin was so upset, because that was my dad, and that was not what he wanted for his legacy. Holly Hilton referred to it as Carlin flavored White Claw. Kind of. Yeah. Yeah. It's yeah. It's wild. So yeah, I don't know exactly how I feel about it. I know I don't love it, but again, I'm not sure artistically I would want to tell someone to just walk away from it wholesale. Like, I don't know I would throw it away. I think it needs improvement, but doesn't everything need improvement? Like, what doesn't, you know? But then I kind of also love the idea of this may be inspiring the next generation of comedians to go learn about George Carlin. You never know. Someone might see this and then fall into a lovely little YouTube Wikipedia rabbit hole, start learning about George Carlin, and then take it back to the old school. Human beings doing actual comedy for humans. Wow, what a concept. I really appreciate you making time for me this week. The Iowa caucuses are on Monday. We'll have plenty of coverage of that next week. Remember, you can stay in touch with me online on my Linktree site. Follow the podcast. If you're listening to the podcast, please write a review of the podcast so that others can find it. Be sure to like our channel, subscribe on YouTube, and click the notification bell so you never miss a program. Until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. Thank you for making time for me. Have a wonderful weekend. Stay warm. And as always, keep on shining because someone, somewhere needs your light right now.